Okay, would you start with introducing yourself, please, and your background?
Maybe I'll start with introducing Larry. So I'll let him certainly introduce himself as well, but I want to welcome him aboard as the new senior planner in the department, and the one that obviously will be working with you guys most directly. I think we're very fortunate to have Larry. I know a number of you probably met him when he presented to the council subcommittee on some housing issues as a representative for the Mass Smart Growth Alliance. He comes to us with a tremendous amount of experience, and I think he'll be a great addition. Has already hit the ground running and is in his second week of work. So with that, I'll let you introduce yourself as well, Larry.
Great, thanks, Steve. And I'm looking forward to working with the partnership and more generally working in the town of Watertown. Immediately before starting here, I was at the Massachusetts Smart Growth Alliance for 5.5 years. I was focusing on statewide on advocacy, and a significant part of it was on housing production. Before that, I was at the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, working for Secretary Bialecki as the state's permit ombudsman, including management of the MassWorks program. And before that, I was at the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Thank you, Larry. How about if we go around the room and just state our names and our role? I'm Fred Reynolds. I chair the meeting.
I'll call out people just because you need to give some order. So David, why don't you go next?
Sure, I'm David Leon. Nice to meet you, Larry. I serve on the Housing Partnership.
Helen?
Hi, Larry. I'm Helen Oliver. I've been on the partnership for a couple years.
Cliff?
I'm Cliff Cook. I'm a member of the Housing Partnership, and I think we've crossed paths in Cambridge, if I remember correctly.
Michael?
Michael Ara. I'm the Executive Director at the Watertown Housing Authority and the newest member of the Watertown Housing Partnership. So it's nice to meet you, Larry.
And Tori? Need to unmute yourself, Tori.
I was unmuted, but I'm not sure what was happening. But anyway, hi, Larry, member of the partnership. I've been on the partnership for quite a while now and looking forward to working with you.
Thanks. And the other people here, I think, are members of the audience, but some pretty frequent attendees. So Jen, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself too?
Hi, I'm Jennifer with Metro West Collaborative Development.
And Elodia? Come on. We're not hearing you, Elodia.
Sorry, Steve, I'm doing the best I can. Can you hear me now?
You can barely hear you.
I don't know what is going on. Let somebody else introduce themselves.
Okay, Mark, you're the last one.
Hi, I'm Mark Itzkevich. I'm here in Watertown. I'm a member of the Watertown Community Preservation Act Committee.
And Elodia is the chair of the Community Preservation Committee as well, and obviously interested in housing issues and has come to a number of the partnership meetings. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Fred.
Thank you, everyone. Larry, I assume you're taking notes.
I am.
And speaking of notes, we have minutes from our last meeting that have been distributed. Do we have any comments, corrections, etc.?
Vote to approve the minutes of the June 16th, 2020 meeting.
That's correct.
Second.
I think he made a motion.
Yeah, it was a motion.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Second from David. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Michael?
Aye.
In favor?
Yes. Aye.
Okay. And Helen?
Aye.
Helen, you vote?
Yes, aye. Yes.
Okay.
Up.
And did I miss somebody? I missed Tori.
I
You
vote aye.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the minutes are approved as written. The next agenda item that we have has to do with emergency relief assistant for public housing families. And Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you present the case as you presented to me.
I remember speaking to Fred just about the Emergency Rental Assistance Fund for public housing families, and my apologies for not making the meeting last month, obviously. I think it's sort of changed tune since last we spoke, and I just mentioned to the chair that I'd like to have an agenda item because I was concerned public housing families were going to be omitted, and being how they are sort of your lowest of the low in the Watertown area for area median income for families. I was curious as to why, and that has not been the case. And so, when Jennifer and Jenna Willis and Jan Singer are working on this with the Watertown Community Foundation, they approached public housing residents, and as of today, we have, I believe, 8 or 9 families that are eligible and will receive funds based on their bedroom size and debt. So just wanted to sort of make sure that public housing families were eligible for the emergency rental assistance, along with what seems like to be most of the public will be able to apply to this. So really was just kind of opening it up to discussion as to why we would want to exclude public housing families, but at this point we're not doing that. So it might be a moot point. But.
Okay. You are talking specifically about families who are several months in arrears on their rent and in danger of being kicked out?
Correct. Even with the eviction moratorium, obviously we're the landlord, but we have regulations, and so we can't just look the other way. The best way to secure their tenancy and probably the cheapest rent in Watertown is to pay their rent. And so we've, I think, struggled in the past with public housing residents not quite being up to the level, if you would, of Section 8 residents when it comes to feeling the sense of urgency that rent needs to come before other bills. And so we're working on that and making strides towards that. But again, I just wanted to make sure that they were eligible for the program. So.
And the reason they're in trouble is that they failed to fill out the paperwork for whatever reason. I'm not faulting them. And once they do that, they get rent abatement anyway.
So yes, they have rent is calculated 30% of their gross income. They're supposed to report to us right away so we can help them if they have a change in hours or obviously a loss of income due to COVID-19. So the people that we were wanting to help were those who formed arrears as a direct result of losing income in COVID-19. I think there's an argument to be made that people who were repaying their debt and where things were going well and they were working closely with the housing authority, which is not everybody, probably under 30–40%, saw struggling at the beginning and certainly much worse now because they were repaying their repayment agreement. They were doing everything right. They had 45% of the gross income to pay down a debt of $2,000 or $3,000, which is high, but maybe their rent was $1,100 or $900, and 45% is really cumbersome, but they're doing their best. And now COVID-19 happened. They have a loss of income and they sort of lost that stride. So, I think there's an argument to be made for those who had arrears before 4/1, but at this point, we're only looking at public housing residents that saw a direct result, from COVID-19 losing income. And that's what I wanted to mention. And then, like you mentioned, again, the interim adjustments is what we call them when people adjust their rent to make sure that it's reflective of their actual rent. Sometimes that's not an easy process, especially when you have part-time jobs. We're state-aided public housing, so we do have a few undocumented individuals, and there's also language barriers. So there's a lot of reasons why they'll be late to get us paperwork, and to be honest, the state, DHCD, is less lenient than they used to be. And we really have to be very tight now. If they submit paperwork, the first of the month, that's one thing. But if you submit it 7 weeks late, it would need my discretion to go back to the original date. And again, if there's a lag in documentation, it requires a lot of work with the resident. So it's not always just as simple as you can change the rent and you're all set because you're in public housing. It's quite complicated. And again, I always emphasize that they are, I believe, the lowest area median income residents in this area. So just my food for thought.
I have a couple questions. I'm a little confused here about what exactly what the source of the issue is. Is the source of the issue that these are people that were paying 30%, they lost income because of COVID and did not make a timely paperwork update with you to adjust their income and thus adjust their payment? Or are these people that were already in arrears, and what we're talking about is that they're not just paying 30%, they're paying 45%? And then I'm not quite sure how this fits in here. I mean,
you had a few people that had arrears.
Any judgment here?
No, I know. Yeah. No, there was a few people that had arrears from prior, right? So there were people that might have had that $1,500 debt, and then either they're paying it down, or they just didn't give us the timely paperwork, and next thing you know, their debt got huge because of COVID-19. Or you had somebody that had nothing. They had a credit of $5, and then COVID occurred, and they, in a sense, are truly those that need the assistance. But as of right now, those who receive checks are not going to get anything for arrears prior to 4/1. It's like we took a snapshot of time and we drew it at April 1st, because if it's March is when you pay your April rent, the money you earn in March is for 4/1. And so 4/1 seemed like the right time to say, okay, we're not, this fund is not meant to just pay back arrears to the Public Housing Authority just because you had arrears. It's for people, again, that were impacted by COVID-19, if that makes it clear.
So these are people that have had a rent, that have fallen short in the rent since April 1 because of loss of income due to COVID?
It could be a loss of hours. It's not just zero income, right? It's not like they had $900 rent and then they're at the $5 minimum. It could be that they went from 900 to 300 and they lagged, they struggled.
I understand that.
Yeah. Okay.
I understand that. I mean, a lot of people had their hours cut back rather than eliminated. And, that if you're already living on the margin, it makes it all that much harder. I certainly get that. So what we're talking about here are households that lost income since April 1 and have fallen short on their rent since that date. And it sounds like in some cases they could have filed paperwork more quickly with you to reduce their rent, but did not. Maybe in some cases they couldn't just because of when the dates fell. Is that correct?
Yeah, and then including one of the individuals, actually a Watertown R&V employee, and they were struggling to even get us the documentation. So we were talking to the employer, but we needed to get that actual tangible paper so we could adjust the income. And so we can do retros on many of these things, but not when it lags too far. And then, like I said, we did have a few residents with language barriers as well. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Other discussion, David?
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Michael, why did you suggest that it was moot at this juncture? Maybe moot because what?
We have, the Community Foundation did approach us for public housing residents, and we sent about 8, 9 very tough cases. I think we sort of selected the short list. And now that the Resiliency Fund is essentially, trying to advertise as much as they can in the town, we posted it on Facebook today. We sent out a robocall, and we anticipate getting more public housing families to apply to this fund. So it seems like the issue of whether or not public housing families were being considered is no longer an issue. It seems like they're getting access to the fund.
Because are you talking about the Community Foundation Resilience Fund, or are you talking about another? Which fund?
Resilience Fund, the Resilience Fund. And if that's not the Emergency Rental Assistance Fund that was discussed in June, my apologies, but I'm talking about the Watertown Community Foundation Resiliency Fund.
They are two different, I think they're completely two different funds. Yeah.
If there's two different funds and we're talking about two different things. And so it should have been an agenda item about the emergency rental assistance that was discussed in June. It's just about the resiliency fund. And so if they still aren't eligible for the emergency rental assistance, again, it seems like a moot point because that's okay. The resiliency fund is addressing the fact that people that had a loss of income as of 4/1 are helping, getting help and assistance from the town. So.
Can I ask you, Larry, have have you determined if this is possible to provide funding from the home funds, knowing that there's a lot of paperwork involved?
Well, if I could jump in here. So I think we're getting a whole bunch of things confused here. So one is the funds that the resiliency fund has gotten and that they're making available for people. And that's, they had 25,000, they've gotten another 25,000. They're making that available to a variety of people who have demonstrated a need. And I think you're right, Michael, that they've made that available to anybody, regardless of where they are or what their, public housing. The partnership has decided to utilize 175,000, at least 175,000 initially, of program income that we have to set up our own emergency rental assistance program. And one of the things that we said that we were not going to do is make that available for people who were in publicly assisted housing. So if you're hoping that the funds that this group is putting aside make those available for your residents, then yeah, we still need to talk about that. Because the decision last meeting was to not make it available to them. On the other hand, if the resilience fund has addressed that need, and then maybe it isn't an issue for you so much that the funds we're putting forward had that limitation.
I think I was just more curious of the rationale. I did see that you had the 175 from the CDBG program income, and that's fantastic, and it's addressing those below 80% area median income. I think it was just sort of, if there was no fund for public housing, what was that rationale in a way? Because I know that I spoke to the Newton Housing Authority director, and that is not the case in Newton, that they felt like public housing should be eligible. So I guess I was just curious to the rationale, because again, if there's some sort of fund for public housing residents, I think that's fantastic. It really doesn't, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Your other items on the agenda, can I ask you just point blank, what would you like us to do at this time?
At this time, it sounds like the emergency rental assistance, omitting public housing families wouldn't be such a bad course of action, because there's another fund, as long as I guess that population's addressed. So no, I have no objection to carrying forward the emergency rental assistance for, not going to public housing subsidy. So.
All righty. David, do you have a comment?
Well, let me just, that's why I wanted to clarify with Michael, because that there was some confusion between the two, the resilience fund and the emergency assistance, rental assistance fund. And I think it's been spoken to sort of by Cliff or when we were considering it last month, was, I think the thinking was that, I think the word was maybe initially, because the fund is only being funded by the $175,000. And I know I, for one, and notwithstanding our CPC chair here, hope that it'll be more deeply funded through the Community Preservation Committee. But that since initially it was only being funded with 175, and the issue of the Housing Authority residents being able to have the income adjustments when their income is, when there's a reduction in their income, that the initial thinking was that not to make them eligible. Notwithstanding, like you said, Newton and perhaps other towns are including public housing residents, but Newton, I think, was funding it on the order of, was it like 1.75 or 2 million or something? How many?
2.5 million,
2.5 million, and we only
David.
have
We have a lot of money.
So I think that was, I don't want to speak for the Housing Authority, but I think that was part of the discussion, was that the initial funding was only 175, and the thought was that, that the income can be adjusted, I'm sorry, the rent can be adjusted as a result of the decrease in income due to COVID. But I don't think it was, I think the idea was down the road that we could revisit that.
That was my one point. If I could just very quickly just say, if it was just something that could be available down the road, that it wasn't forever, because if the other funds would no longer become available, which I think is going to be the case, then I would, argue again that it's the adjustments is real quick overthinking of, I think, how difficult it can be actually to be able to pay rent in these times. And something to keep in mind is when you have a 30 to 40% area median income individuals, there are things that don't come up in deductions as well. Some out-of-pocket expenses we simply can't deduct. And so when we have a few residents that we're working with very closely, and I emphasize a few because the majority of residents unfortunately disappear or change numbers, and this game begins. But when somebody's working with us, I think to pay down their debt, they should be eligible for those type of funds, because I don't think we would very quickly send people over, recommend people, unless they were truly those that are working with us and going in the right direction. So, maybe there's some added language there. I don't know how we'd want to do that, but again, that's down the road. For the time being, they have access to funds. And so I think we can move forward with that. And my apologies for the confusion. That's what I get for not showing up.
I think that we could say at this point that we can revisit this issue down the road if necessary, which I unfortunately do not doubt will be the case in a couple months. I know that Fred wants to move the agenda forward.
Okay. And,
Is sympathetic. It was just the initial source of funds was pretty limited.
yes, I know.
Thank you, Fred. I just wanted to ask, Michael, I assume your folks are also applying for raft funds, other funding sources if they're seeing Jenna, because, that Massachusetts just provided another $20 million. I know myself, I find it so confusing with all these different funding pots. It'd be nice to have a diagram, but.
I think Jen or Steve, maybe if you would know for sure, but I think the 20 million, to my understanding, that's where we're getting some of this funding for resiliency fund. I could be speaking out of turn on that. And I think the other thing is, yes, it is raft that could be helpful, but they are not eligible because we're not at an eviction yet. With the eviction moratorium, I can't even serve a 14-day notice to quit, which is good. I think an extension until October made sense, but actually Masnarro, which is the large public housing advocate for the state, is in opposition of extending it for a full year. Because then, unfortunately, if there could just be language to exempt public housing, because we're not trying to kick people out, but we need some, protocols before we can even get to raft. You need to get them to have the notice and to have that fear that they're actually going to be evicted, or they will not be eligible for raft at this time.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, other items on the agenda. I'm not hearing a motion to do something at this time. Does anyone want to make a motion, or should we move on?
I think we should move on.
Okay, I'm in agreement. Is everyone else in agreement? Let's move on to comments from Jennifer concerning the Metro West Assistance Program that we have. Just a quick update.
Well, I think it's important to start with, it is not our program. It is very much still a to be decided program. From my perspective, I think at the last meeting, the Housing Partnership put forward some framework and batted it over to the council, but I don't think there's really been a definitive set of program guidelines created yet. And then, of course, there would need to be a process for determining who and how the program would be administered. So I'm happy to talk sort of generally about some of the other programs that we're seeing out there, but nothing has happened really from my perspective anyway, since the last Housing Partnership meeting. I'm sure Steve may have more to say though about that.
It may be appropriate to have an update from Steve. So otherwise it's kind of.
Well, I would say two things. One, the minutes of the council subcommittee meeting where they endorsed the motion or the efforts of the partnership to use the money for that purpose did not get reported out to the full council. I expect that'll happen at the council meeting on August 11th. So hopefully we'll be good to go at that point. And maybe I'm wrong, but I thought, Jen, what you could do tonight in terms of that agenda item is maybe talk about some of the programs you're implementing in some of the other communities, and maybe highlight some of the, from your perspective, some of the points of question of, you can go this way or that way, and maybe highlight a few of those for the partnership.
Sure. So let's see. Well, the only program that is really fully in swing right now is in Newton. And I would say a couple things have emerged. The applicants are very low income. The majority of applicants have zero income or very, very low incomes. The other thing we've been a little surprised at is the rents have been lower than we thought. So the assistance required per household has been lower. In Newton, what they decided to do was provide assistance of 70% of the rent. So if your rent's $1,000, your assistance is $700. And the average housing assistance is only around $1,200 per month for 3 months. And the city of Newton had actually bid $2,500 per month for 3 months, which is what got them to the $2.5 million number. So those are just things we hadn't really thought about or planned on. The other thing is that a lot of people's leases end August 31st. And I don't know what's going to happen after that. So things like, will there be rent increases? People aren't going to be evicted, but will leases get renewed? It's just a program implementation item that we hadn't really thought about. We thought, we'll write 3 months worth of checks and then we'll be done. But sadly, we're realizing it's just a lot more complicated than that. And then just to Mike's point earlier, it's very, very difficult for people to complete their applications. The document, even pretty basic documents are hard to acquire for some folks and hard to figure out how to transmit to us. I can't tell you how many blurry, JPEGs people are emailing me or texting me that, so it's just very, very slow going. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Jennifer, may I ask a couple questions? Has your organization administered a program like this before?
Before Newton?
Yes, before COVID.
Well, no, we've never done an emergency rental assistance. We have done rental assistance, small ones with the town of Lincoln and the town of Boxborough. And those were more standard full income eligibility reviews. Whereas in the emergency situation, we're really trying to keep the level of paperwork to a bare minimum.
Okay. Interesting comment about the rents as well. From what I'm reading, this may well be a renter's market this fall, given what's happening in the more urban areas with students not reappearing to rent up units.
Okay, well,
And it may ripple out.
not hearing that we have any action to take right now. We're waiting on the town council, if I understood everything. I'd like really to move on to Larry and the 5-year home consolidated plan that's on the agenda.
I'm sorry, Fred, can I ask one last thing just related to
Go ahead.
Steve? So is that what you anticipate an actual action item to take a vote on it at the August 11th meeting?
Yeah, so assuming that the council subcommittee produces the minutes of that meeting, which I still haven't seen, but I'm assuming that they'll be very motivated to do since they were concerned that it wasn't on the last agenda. So assuming that they do that, then yeah, the committee meeting will be reported out. And an action item would be to support the motion of the partnership. And assuming that vote's taken in a favorable way, then we'll be off and running to start figuring out how to implement the program.
So there was an issue with the minutes and they weren't able to get it on the last agenda for the town council?
Yeah, so when the subcommittee met, they discussed the motion that you all approved at your last meeting. And to make a long story short, they endorsed that. I indicated to them I thought that ought to be, it's a pretty significant policy step. So that ought to be reported out to the full council for them to at least have an opportunity to weigh in. And so they all agreed, and that was part of the motion. Fortunately, then that didn't get reported out to the full council. So again, hopefully it will be at this next meeting.
Okay, can we move on to Larry and the consolidated plan?
So the West Metro Consortium filed the 5-year consolidated plan for fiscal 21 through 25. I will send a copy of that electronically to everybody. It's a long document. You'll find that there are not surprises in it, certainly not for people like you who have been engaged in the work of affordable housing for a considerable period of time. I would be happy to summarize a few quick points, but considering the agenda items that we've got, and we are ending at 5:30, we want to get to the HPP. I would also be happy to defer and just send the email out. It's up to you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything, either way is fine with me. If there's any big issue there, otherwise I think it would be better to, as you suggest, to distribute the plan, and then we can have any comments after we see it.
I'll do that.
Okay, that moves us on then to the status of the housing production plan. And Larry and I have compared what I have in my computer and also what is in the master file. And Larry has distributed from the master file what we believe is the latest goals and strategies. Prior to COVID-19, we were at the point of maybe we should distribute this to people in Watertown affiliated with the government, not in general, and let them comment on it and collect some of these comments and see if we have any errors. We've distributed it for everyone to take a good look at it. It's been a while since we've seen it, and do we have comments, corrections, etc. from anyone?
Yeah, one general comment I would make is that where we use the word concern, I would replace that with the word evaluate, which is more suggestive of an action.
Evaluate rather than consider?
Evaluate rather than consider in a number of instances, yes.
It's wording semantics, and unless someone has an objection to that, I think we should allow that to change. Does any other comment on that or something else?
I think that's fine. And Larry, I know you've had a chance to look through the goals. Maybe you can provide a little bit of feedback from your perspective on, what you've seen so far.
Right. So I do want to provide comments on the substance of the goals and strategies, but I think it's worthwhile talking about the overall context, because we agree with you that with the GLAM determination, that provides more flexibility for Watertown, both in what its goals and strategies should be, but also what the plan looks like at this point, we're not really in the same position of submitting to DHCD for approval a housing production plan. And as reflected in a prior conversation where you were discussing renaming this to housing plan, there's flexibility in what goes into the document, how extensive it is, what the contents are. And I think that there is value in using the draft that you've already prepared as a foundation. And while the goals and strategies are vetted with others, that draft could be turned into a draft that you could review again, that would be a housing plan that could serve the purposes that I think we need, which is to have a blueprint that all of you and others in Watertown view as the blueprint, and also send a message to others about what the town's goals are, what the strategies are, and the commitment to affordable housing.
Okay, just to bring everyone on the same page, we had a housing production plan with the idea of submitting it, but once we didn't have to do that, the plan was modified as our housing plan, and we've basically done what you're suggesting in reviewing it. That's not saying it's perfect. I just wanted to point out that the goal of this is to have a Watertown housing plan, not to submit it to any government authority. Although
Right.
submitting it to a government authority might have some advantages to us in terms of perhaps some assistance and funding, but this is our housing plan. We have two hands up now. David went first.
Go ahead, Cliff, if you want.
No. Go ahead, David.
So I'm glad Larry spoke to that, but I just wanted, because I remember Jen in particular had kind of, back in February or whenever it was, we were trying to determine that issue as to whether or not, even though we had the the area met the threshold, that whether or not it made sense or whether or not DHCD would even accept it as a housing production plan. So are we clear on whether or not they would accept it or they wouldn't accept it, or whether or not, we may not want to do, but what do we have kind of a definitive answer as to whether
Do we care?
I'm sorry?
Do we care what they do? If they don't accept it, that doesn't matter to us because we're not required to submit it.
No, I'm saying I know we're not, but there were reasons for. I'm not saying I'm in favor of doing that, but we were trying to understand that threshold issue because it was for either competitive grants or whatever, whether you had an HPP, and there might have been some other benefits as to whether we wanted the actual approval or not. I'm not saying we go that way, but I remember that was one of the last questions we were trying to get answered. In terms of the substance of the goals and strategies, I don't think it makes much difference. But
I do not believe we have that answer unless someone wants to chime in. Maybe Larry could figure that out. Sure, go ahead.
So I'll let Larry answer first, and then I'll follow up with what information he's found out.
We have not obtained a specific answer to that from DHCD as to whether they would accept a housing production plan from Watertown given its position vis-a-vis 40B. Looking at the guidelines, it is not clear to me that they would want to have go through the process and approve a housing production plan that for them has no procedural value because it's not a safe haven for us, for the community, if it has an approved plan and then it's certified. And I would also say that the standards for the comprehensiveness and the content of a housing production plan are much higher in the guidelines than what we would need to do a housing plan that is useful to Watertown. And so just from the standpoint of looking at this from where are we most effective, I think we're most effective in getting this housing plan completed promptly and then focusing on trying to implement the plan.
Yeah, and so just to add to that, you know, I think we can have further conversations with DHCD about whether they think there's value in us providing them what our housing, you know, plan is. But it's most important, I think, from Watertown's perspective to produce a plan that meets our needs in light of meeting the GLAM and not be constrained or restricted by you know, the DHCD requirements, both in terms of the content and implementation strategies. We ought to, you know, do a plan that makes sense for us, and we'll try to glean from again from the state whether that would be a value for them to receive or not.
Okay, Cliff, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just have one question. Well, at least one question. My understanding, well, let me rephrase that. Does having a housing production plan give you any advantages when you apply for grant money of any sort across the state? I'm not aware of it, but doesn't mean that's not the case. So I'm wondering if, you know, there might be an advantage to us. Let's say we were the town or a project that we were involved with, which is Jennifer's group was applying for some sort of funding from MHP or some other organization or DHCD. Will we get additional points for having a housing production plan?
And I think that's the answer. It's in their evaluation of a grant application. You get additional points for having a certified housing production plan. But I think part of the question becomes if you've met the you know, the GLAM, so there's not a need for a reason to have a certified plan.
If they won't certify it, it's sort of a moot point for us then in that case.
Right.
Right.
You're
So,
saying that they're not going to certify it.
what I'm hearing at this point is that we have the plan that we intend to have as a housing plan that's for Watertown, and we can submit it to DHCC or not at a future date when we have the plan completed and all the comments. Did I misunderstand something here? Or can we move on to any changes in the plan itself?
We can move on from my point of view.
Okay, do we have any changes other than putting the word evaluate in? Or we can discuss that if anyone has a discussion on that point.
It's fine.
I would be happy to provide a few substantive comments, if that's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
So, in general, I think that the goals and strategies are sound, and that they're a logical extension of the 2014 goals and strategies. The particular comments that I have are on, you know, I basically have 3 or 4 substantive comments. One of them on goal 1 is that it was not clear to me, and would be helpful to get clarification on what's meant by strategy G, allow flexibility to increase the number of functionally affordable units. On goal 2, I thought that it would be—
Should we handle these one at a time?
Sure.
Cliff, do you want to comment on that? Or?
Sure. I believe our thinking on 1G is that to the extent possible, we would like additional units that are added to our stock to comply with the SHI guidelines. But since we are now in safe harbor, that is not absolutely necessary. And then there could be situations where we can create affordable units that don't strictly meet the SHI guidelines, say they don't meet the sizes, or they're for slightly different income groups, make it a little bit higher to say 95% in some cases per se. It might make more sense to look at home ownership programs that are more middle income, which again might not qualify for the SHI. So I think that's the intent. Maybe a better way to phrase it, I'll grant you that, but that's the intent.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on this? Or we move on to the next comment then, Larry?
Yes. Goal 2, strategy B, which is about supporting the housing authority's efforts to rehab and create new units. I think that it would be helpful to be clear about interest, if there is any, in creating new public housing units, because most of the focus at the state level and in other communities has been leveraging housing authority land in order to create affordable units of other kinds, and or market rate units to have a mixed income development. So getting some more clarity about that would be helpful.
Okay, again, you're talking about a different program actually, and I believe Michael has applied for some funding for some of those programs. I recall that Jen had a thought on this some time ago, and if you calculate having a public housing unit self-supporting by having some market rate units in it, the numbers don't work because the market rate units aren't going to pay enough to subsidize somebody at 30% or 40% AMI. If you want to change the wording on this, or what would you do?
No, I'm just trying to, I'd like to have more clarity about whether the intent of this strategy is to create new public housing units or to create affordable units on public housing land.
Sounds like Larry's making.
Michael, can Michael comment since you're the one who brought this up initially?
David, you can go.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I mean, I just better understand. It sounds like Larry's framing it, asking whether or not you want just broader language that allow maybe more things to happen on Watertown, housing authority property, like, market rate, or just limited to the language that's there. Is that what you're sort of asking to have, whether we might have brought up language to include other possible options on housing authority property? Is that what you're asking about, or something else? Did I miss it? Larry?
Yeah. I'm starting with what the intent is of the strategy. Is the intent to create public housing units, or is the intent to create public housing and or other affordable units that may be subsidized by another funding source?
Well,
I would say, I would jump in and because I know we're short on time, and I'll be as brief as I can be. But yes, the strategy was to create new affordable units that would certainly be able to help the community, right? So the funding stream, that's complex. I don't know if it's going to be the mixed income, which they're now calling the PHO grant. The numbers don't look that grand, and I don't know what MRVP, project-based voucher rent reasonableness, will be then, and if we can afford it versus the Section 8. And we're looking to reposition some of our federal public housing units, and we've already created the 501c3 to, take on the fact that that's going to have a very high cash flow. But that's separate. I'm just saying that creating new affordable units on existing public housing land, there's so many different program options right now, and then the rehabilitate is just, I think, addressing the fact that it gets $600,000 a year for capital needs separately on what they call formula funding. But I think most housing authorities would tell you, even something as large as a Boston or Cambridge, they're only getting 10 cents on the dollar for what they need on capital. So sometimes it would be helpful to have access. So I think this is just broad, vague language to say, if it's going to go towards the betterments for the community and to have more units or to, prop up things that are going to fail, and we'd lose the development, and then we lose all the public housing units, then, you know, perhaps a strategy would be to make sure that we don't do that.
Yes. So I believe that the funding, both federal and state, is in some degree of flux right now as to what the program going forward will be. And I'm in favor personally of vague language there, and we can do whatever needs to be done to satisfy the requirements of whatever grants we're applying for, whatever funding we're applying for.
And I would just make one note that the vague is always good, because if we, you know, something comes across the table and we say, I don't know, this sounds like, again, it's mixed income, and what are we doing, paying for fair market rate units, then we wouldn't appropriate it. You know, there would be a way of preventing that from happening. So the vaguer, the better, I think. So.
I think lawyers like to say broad instead of vague, but anyway, that's just.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
That's a lawyer for you.
But for example, Larry, if you use the word in that B2B, if you said, and create new affordable units, is that better than, or did you specifically want to clarify?
I think that would be helpful, but I think what's true for all of these is that this is a bulleted outline, and it's going to have to be filled out with some text. And so understanding that the intent is for it to be broad, then the text can refer to all the different, or the possibility of different funding sources.
So you were trying to clarify whether they would be specifically housing authority units or more.
Right, it doesn't have to be,
yeah,
right,
okay.
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, what was your next one?
Right, so what I'm going to take on that is you don't have to change the heading, but in the text, this can be addressed. The fourth goal refers to the ability of Watertown residents and workers to stay here. And although I like the overall framing of this as far as different price points, I'm concerned that the wording of it sounds like this only applies to Watertown residents and workers, when I think, you know, reading the minutes and having an understanding of the partnership, it seems like it is for it's for anyone who might want to live in Watertown, but especially those who are residents and workers in Watertown.
I'd have no problem with that.
I think it's a smart suggestion. I agree with that.
Larry, do you want to reword that as you believe it should be, and then bring it at a future meeting?
Yes.
And we can, unless there's more discussion at this point.
No.
Okay, can we move on then to the next comment?
Yes. On the same goal, two of the strategies seem very similar. They're both referring to doing things around high frequency lines, and I thought the two could potentially be merged. And I also thought that that we could use plainer language around induced demand, so that if this is a document that's going to be read by the public, there'll be more of understanding what is meant by that.
Okay, my suggestion is you give it some thought and reword it and bring it to us at a future meeting.
Okay.
Any more discussion on this point? Can we move on to the next comment?
Just ask which were duplicative. It's not
Sure thing.
completely clear to me.
Larry, which one was the two that you thought were duplicative in 4?
Strategy A, I believe, and maybe it's no, I'm sorry. It is strategy B and strategy D.
B and which one?
B and D.
B and D.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And I would conclude by saying on goal 5, I think it's a great idea. I think it's great to incorporate community engagement around affordable housing as one of the goals.
You mean 6, actually, right?
Any other comments, Larry?
Is that 6 or 5? I
That's
see 6 now. Did you mean
Okay.
6 or 5?
So you're gonna come back with a little rewording suggestions at our next meeting. Do we have any other business to put on the next agenda? Do I hear a motion to,
I
go
think
ahead.
he is looking to be heard.
Can I just ask if there's anything, any development projects that are in the pipeline that we'd like to know about?
Steve, you want to take that one? I only know of one, and it's not housing.
Yeah, there's certainly some lab developments that have been coming forward, and they continue to come forward on a number of different properties. In terms of residential or mixed use, there have been some conversations about projects, but I don't think anything that's far enough along or real enough that I would want to bring it up in in a public meeting and say, yeah, you'll see this one in the next month or so. If some of those become more realistic, then you'll certainly hear about them shortly.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other new business?
I think Elodie wanted the word.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Can you hear me? Just to make sure. Fred, the minutes are way behind for your meetings, and for those of us that attend frequently and are trying to stay informed about what's going on, it would be nice to have those minutes. They've already been approved, but February is missing and March is missing. And the other thing is, I know you have a working document, but I attend all these meetings and I can never follow what's going along because I'm not able to see a document. So I understand that you don't want it to go public across the community, but those of us that are invested in figuring out this housing issue should be included. Thank you.
May I respond to that?
The point that we are at this point is for the housing partnership to have the document to our satisfaction and then distribute it for comments. That's been our intent. Now, perhaps we're wrong in that intent, and it should have gone to a lot of other people. The second point on the minutes, I apologize on behalf of our members. However, we have been struggling under staffing issues and also the virus issue. I believe you're very familiar with these issues yourself. We'll try to do much better in the future.
So we will certainly get the minutes to the clerk and have them posted. We haven't done that, and now that we have Larry on board, we'll make sure that gets taken care of. And certainly for a future meeting, having a document so that at least people won't, if we were meeting together, typically what we do is we have a bunch of them, and so people could grab a copy and flip through it as we went. It's a little more challenging, but maybe at the next meeting, what we'll do is have it available, share screen and put the document up that we're talking about. That way we'll know that everyone's talking about the same document, and maybe that'll help. So we'll try to do better.
Very good idea.
Mr. Chair, I promise that the February and June minutes will go up within a very short period of time, a day or two at most.
March, Larry, March is.
March was canceled because of
Okay.
because of
I just
COVID.
went by I looked through all the agendas and made a list to see what
Yeah,
minutes had
it
been
was
published
canceled.
and what hadn't, so it does not.
And a
indicate-
question, Mr. Chair, for whether you want to have an August meeting.
Is there any discussion of this, having an August meeting? I'm not saying a compelling reason unless some projects come online. Does anyone wish to propose it? Or we certainly have our plan that we're developing, but August is vacation month.
I'm
Any
happy-
comments, proposals?
Unless we have a compelling reason to meet, and that's our only item, maybe we should give people the month off.
We're
Any
likely
objection?
to
Sorry, go ahead.
We're likely to have more on an emergency rental assistance program. And then I think we could also make progress on the housing production plan, but it's up to you. I just wanted to raise that point so there was a decision you could make about it.
So how about we leave it, if something comes up that needs a meeting, we'll try to establish a quorum. Otherwise, we can cancel it. Objections, comments? Okay, judging by the time, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Thank you, Larry. Welcome to Watertown.
Thanks,
Thank
Larry.
you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to see everybody. Good night.